Still under oath, ma'am. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court.
Yes.
Investigator Fitzgerald, I want to draw your attention back to late March and early April of 2019. Did you become involved in an investigation involving the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson?
Yes, I did.
And how did you become involved in that investigation?
I became involved on that Monday when I came into work. We found out that had happened over the end of the last week and into the weekend, and then we were tasked with different things.
Did you obtain any search warrants regarding that investigation?
I did. I obtained 2 search warrants, one for the Capital Waste Services and one for FedEx in Columbia that were both prior employment of Mr. Rowland.
And did you execute those search warrants yourself?
I did.
Did you obtain any documents pursuant to that lawfully executed search warrant?
I did.
Beg the court's indulgence, Your Honor. Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with what's been marked previously for ID purposes as States Exhibit 192 and 193. Investigator Fitzgerald, do you recognize what I just handed you?
I do.
What are they?
They are the documents that I received. The one had been a chain of custody through SLED.
And are those the documents that you obtained pursuant to the search warrant?
Yes, they were.
Do you have scissors up there?
I do not.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with some scissors to open the document.
Thank you.
And which item is that labeled?
It's going to be the personnel file for Nathaniel Rowland from Capital Waste Services.
What item number is that?
It's going to be item number 192, States Exhibit.
And what is inside of that envelope there?
Inside is the documentation that Capital Waste Services had, and they had printed out and ready for me to pick up when I went there on the date that I served the search warrant.
And do those documents fairly and accurately reflect the records that you collected in April of 2019?
They do.
Your Honor, at this time, State moves to enter what's been previously marked for ID purposes as State's Exhibit 192 into evidence.
Any additional objection?
Additionally, I would object under 901.
On what basis?
Lack of authentication.
All right, response?
Your Honor, these are self-authenticating documents. We have affidavits in lieu that beg the court's indulgence. Your Honor. The state was provided affidavits that provide the certification of these records, and pursuant to South Carolina law, these would be admissible with these certifications provided from the companies kept in the ordinary course of business.
Your objection is under 901, requirement of authentication or identification. You contend that they're self-authenticating under Rule 902, what provision?
Your Honor, that would be the certification provided in this statute.
Under what provision?
I believe it is Article 9, Chapter 5, Title 19 of the Code.
All right.
Your Honor, I can approach. I have a copy of it.
Yeah. Okay, sure. Let me see it. Have you provided this certification to defense counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Any further argument, Ms. Pennant?
No, Your Honor.
The document is admitted under Article 9, Chapter 5 of the South Carolina Code regarding domestic records that meets the requirements of Rule 8036 of the Rules of Evidence as shown by certification of custodian, which has been shown here, and the exhibits are admitted. Are you offering one or two?
Just one at the moment, Your Honor.
It is admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. Investigator Fitzgerald, I want to turn your attention to item 193.
Yes.
And what is that envelope?
It's going to be the documentation handwriting standard from Nathaniel Rowland's file from FedEx that I received.
And did you obtain those records pursuant to a lawful search warrant?
Yes.
And have you had a chance to take a look at the documents inside the file?
Yes.
And are those, in fact, the documents that you obtained pursuant to your search warrant?
Yes, they are.
And what are those records specifically? Which business?
It's going to be his employment records, any applications that they had on hand, and any internal reviews
And where? What company?
from FedEx ground.
And do those documents fairly and accurately reflect the records that you obtained pursuant to that search warrant in 2019?
Yes, they did.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask that item 193 is entered into evidence.
Says the defense.
Your Honor, for purposes, just under authentication.
Can I understand what you said?
Apologies, Your Honor. I would object to authentication under 901.
All right. Same objection as before. What's your response?
Your Honor, pursuant to Article 9, Chapter 5, Title 19 of the South Carolina Code of Laws, these documents are admissible, along with the fact that they are self-authenticating, given the certification of business records that was obtained by the custodian of records employed at FedEx. A copy of this certification was shown to the defense as well, Your Honor.
All right. The documents are admitted.
Thank you, Judge. Investigator Fitzgerald, other than retrieving these documents that we just talked about, what else did you do during the course of this investigation, if anything?
I followed up on some different leads that we were given. There were there was a lead that I found through going out to FedEx in reference to a female that Mr. Rowland used to come to work with.
Did you make any attempts to track down surveillance footage in this case?
I did not.
Did you make any attempts to collect additional evidence in this case?
Yes.
And what pieces of additional evidence did you attempt to recover?
Yes. We did, myself and a couple other investigators did go out to multiple Dollar General stores to attempt to locate the different cleaning products and potential surveillance video, I misspoke, of Dollar Generals to see if Mr. Rowland had bought the products from any of the Dollar Generals in the area.
And about how many Dollar Generals would you say you visited?
At least 5.
Were you successful in obtaining any additional evidence?
We were not.
No further questions from the state, Your Honor.
By the defense.
Please support, Your Honor.
Yes.
Investigator Fitzgerald, when you said you went out to a number of Dollar Generals,
We did.
some of the stores sold some of the products, but not others. You never found a store that sold everything, right?
Correct.
Did you watch surveillance videos while you were at these stores?
We did, and I misspoke. We attempted to view the footage of the ones that did appear to have some of the products and were unsuccessful
Unsuccessful?
in finding Mr. Rowland on the videos.
Okay. Did you notice anybody else buying these items while you watched the videos?
No, not at that time.
Did you look?
Yes.
So you paid attention to every single person that went through that line to see if anybody bought top bleach?
Right. We were looking for somebody who was buying that volume of the same type of product.
Okay. Did you get receipts?
No, they did look through some of the receipts and were not able to find any that had that type of combination.
Okay. But you didn't see Nathaniel Rowland buying them?
Correct.
Thank you.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. You may step down. And your next witness.
Your Honor, state calls Jack Jamieson.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give in this case will be true, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do so swear.
Thank you. Please have a seat in the witness stand and state your full name for the record.
Thank you. My full name is John Allen Jamieson. Allen is spelled A-L-L-A-N. Jamieson is spelled J-A-M-I-E-S-O-N.
Good afternoon, Mr. Jamieson. Where are you employed?
I'm employed at SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, in the forensic lab.
And how long have you been with SLED?
A little over 4 years.
In what capacity are you employed with SLED?
I'm employed as a question document examiner for SLED.
And just to clarify for the jury, when we say SLED, what specifically do we mean?
The South Carolina Law Enforcement Division.
Generally, what are some of your day-to-day responsibilities?
My duties include the examination and comparison of handwriting, handprinting, signatures, and numerals. My duties also include the examination of mechanical impressions, such things as printouts from photocopiers, typewriting, check protectors, that sort of thing. I'm also involved in the analysis of pens, papers, inks, and pencils, and I also examine documents for alterations, obliterations, and erasures.
And how long have you worked as a question document examiner?
I started my training in June of 1981, so 40 years.
And generally, is there any sort of specialized training associated with your position?
Yes, in order to become a question document examiner, it's a 2-year apprenticeship type program conducted under the tutelage of senior document examiners. They give you cases to do, exemplary work to look at that demonstrate various aspects of question document examination. Training also includes numerous tests, quizzes, both oral and written, as well as there was a mock trial where they made a case that was independently examined by another document examiner, and then I examined the case and then presented my findings as part of the mock court. Document examination also includes continuous training to keep up with various aspects that are new or are changing within the field.
And about how many times do you think you've testified as an expert?
I've testified over 250 times.
Just generally, as far as your experience goes, do you continue to attend trainings and things like that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I attended a training last week that was a online Zoom type training, but yeah, it was as recently as last week.
And are your reports peer reviewed?
Yes, my reports and the entire case.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask that you qualify Mr. Jamieson as an expert in the area of questioned document analysis.
Your Honor, no objection to Mr. Jamieson's qualifications, but I will renew all objections, previously made objections.
He's so qualified as an expert in the field that the state is offering him that.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Jamieson, I want to draw your attention to April of 2019. Were you contacted regarding an investigation that would require your services in the questioned document analysis field?
There was a submission made to the SLED lab that involved QD work.
And what was the extent of your involvement in that investigation?
I received certain documents. I performed a comparison between those documents. I then published a report.
Would you recognize that document if I showed it to you?
Yes.
For the record, Your Honor, I am retrieving what's been previously marked for ID purposes as State's Exhibit 56.
Thank you.
Mr. Jamieson, do you recognize what I just handed you there?
Yes, ma'am. This is lab item number 22. It is it's marked both on the outside of the bag as well as on the document inside with the case number, item number, and my initials.
And was that the item submitted through the SLED lab for your analysis?
That was one of them, yes.
And does that item fairly and accurately represent the item that you were given to perform that handwriting analysis?
I suppose I should open it because I should see the other side of the envelope that's
Yes, sir.
there, please. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, this is the item I examined. It has been subjected to latent print processing since I've seen it, hence the purple color is a developing agent they use for latent prints.
It's not evidence.
Objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Publish an indictment, it's not evidence.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jamieson, I believe you're saying, is that the item that would be what we call the questioned document in this case?
That's correct.
And Your Honor, at this time, I would ask that the state is able to enter item, I believe it's 59, into evidence. I apologize, Your Honor, 56.
Here, I was just over our previously made objections.
It is admitted.
Thank you, Judge. Permission at this time to publish to the jury, Judge? Mr. Jamieson, if you could show the jury the part of the document that you would be performing your analysis on.
I perform my analysis on the totality of the document, but I'm particularly focused in on the handwritten inscription at the top of the envelope on the back side of the envelope.
And Mr. Jamieson, just generally, what is the process that you go through when you're performing a analysis on a questioned document?
It's a three-phase process where I go through the question document in order to determine whether or not it's original, i.e. not a copy, whether it contains identifiable features, are those identifiable features present in sufficient quantity upon which to base a conclusive comparison. The second phase of the examination is I perform a analysis of the known documents. Again, whether or not they're original, whether or not they contain identifying features, whether or not these features are sufficient upon which to base a comparative analysis. And then I also go on to look at the known documents to determine whether or not they're written by one person and whether or not they are comparable to the question documents. Then I perform my one-to-one comparison where I'm comparing features of the handwriting, such things as letter formation, the relative heights between letters, the line quality, the spelling and things like that. And I look for a set of individual similarities that, if it was an identification, that would distinguish the writings between the known and the question as having been written by one person and one person alone.
Now, Mr. Jamieson, the envelope you just held up a minute ago, can you please tell the jury what is written on the front of that envelope? I know it's probably hard for them to see.
Yes. We have a number 4, and we have a circled out or overwritten portion under the number 4. We have job, J-O-B. Beside it is another overwritten portion, and then there's a colon 30, 4 p.m. Next line is duct tape, tape whole body. Next line is gloves. Next line is all black. Next line is flip phone. Next line is gasoline. Next line is matches. And then there's a crossed out line below the matches line.
And can you just hold that up one more time for the jury to see? Thank you, sir. And over the course of your analysis, did you obtain any documents that you utilized in comparing the handwriting to this questioned document?
Yes, there were documents submitted.
Your Honor, I'm retrieving what's been previously entered into evidence as State's Exhibit 190, 192 and 193. Mr. Jamieson, are those the documents that you used to perform your analysis?
Yes, these are the documents.
And are there any identification marks that you put on those documents?
Yes, on each document that I used in the examination has the case number, item number, and my initials, usually at the lower right-hand corner. I've also marked the actual container that was submitted to SLED, again with the case number regarding the item number and my initials.
And did you compare the handwriting on these two items to that of the question document, and that would be item 22 that you just held up?
Yes, I did.
Beg the court's indulgence, Your Honor. Mr. Jamieson, did you prepare a demonstrative for this case?
Yes, I did.
And how do you go about doing that?
Basically, I take a piece of foam board and then I cut out portions of the question documents and the known document and position them side by each to demonstrate some of the features.
And to help the jury understand what we're talking about here, for instance, in item 1 here, line 1, can you just explain the things that you would be looking for or the things that you would be comparing?
Yes, on the left side of the document, we have one of the words that's enlarged about double the size it was on the question note, and that word is duck, D-U-C-K. On the known side, I've cut out various words or word fragments from the known documents in order to demonstrate the similarity in some of the features. For example, The D of duck is a ball and stick formation of the D. The D is open, and that's evidenced in the known documents, first word in on line 1.
And let's go to line 2. What would be something that you would use to compare there, or that you notice?
One of the comparison points would be the W. The W, when one is taught copybook form, when you're first starting out, all the strokes of the W are supposed to be the same height. However, in this case, there's a feature in the fact that the final terminal stroke of the W ends up higher than the rest of the W, and also it ends with a hook. And that hook's evidenced in line 2 beside it on 2 of the W's I've demonstrated.
Jumping down to line 3, what do you notice there?
Among the things I noticed was the fact that the M has a high center, which is not copybook form, as well as the second hump of the M is higher than the first hump.
And on line 4, what did you notice there?
One of the features I noticed was the A. The A's crossbar ends up to the right-hand side of the A, and as they do in the known documents beside them.
And just to clarify, Mr. Jamieson, this column that is labeled question, where did you pull these images from? What are these words reflective of?
They are the words that were on the question note, states exhibit number 56.
And under the known column, were these all contained within the documents that you used to do your comparison?
Yes, they were contained from states exhibits 193 and 192.
All right, Mr. Jamieson, moving down to line 5, what did you notice about that?
All among the features I noticed was the formation of the G. It's a 2-stroke G. The second stroke is an inverted L. There are many, many other ways of making a G, but we have a similarity there. Something else to point out, perhaps, in the word gasoline, you'll notice that the S is much taller than the other letters. When you're taught copybook, they're all supposed to be around the same height. This is what we call a proportion, i.e. in between letters, they're all supposed to be lined across, but this S is much taller in the line there, so it ends up in the known documents as well. The second one in, Lisa, you can see the S is much taller than the rest of the letters in the word.
And Mr. Jamieson, just to clarify for the jury, what is copybook form? What does that mean?
Copybook form is the forms that you're taught when you're in just learning to write. There are several copybook systems out there, but basically it's when you're learning to write, your teacher may have had an exercise book that you would be copying the letters from. They may have been up on the board, and it's the way they teach you to write, by copying from a master pattern, if you will.
And finally, item 6, what were some similarities you noticed there?
Well, we start with the F, which is similar on both sides. It's, again, an inverted L with a stroke through the middle. One of the proportion things that I saw was the P in flip being much taller than the I beside it, and you can see that in line 6 in the known between the P and the H.
And as far as these comparisons go, are these just some of the ones that you noticed, or some of the ones that you notated between the question document and the documents you were provided?
Yes, just some.
Were there others that you didn't put on the demonstrative?
Several. There were several other words that I compared from the question note to the known as well.
All right, Mr. Jamieson. Did you prepare a report in this case?
Yes.
And when you analyze the question document as well as the ones that you were using to compare in this analysis, did you come up with any results?
Yes.
And as far as the results go, what did you determine?
My determination was that it's probable that the writer of the known documents also wrote the question document. Probable means a high degree of likelihood that they were written all by the same writer, both question and known.
And just one more time to clarify, Mr. Jamieson, it's probable, meaning a high degree of likelihood, the writer of the documents you used to compare to the question document, which here would be the envelope, it's probable that is the same individual.
That's correct.
Let's talk about the word probable. Do you utilize a scale containing several reporting options?
Yes, the scale that we use is much like a spectrum. In the middle of the spectrum, we have I don't know. Cannot be determined whether or not the person either did or did not write it. Moving out, and at the farthest end of the spectrum, on either end, is the person is identified as having written something, or they've been excluded as having written something. So we're moving out from the middle. We have indications the person either did or did not write the document. Indications means that there's a degree of likelihood, but my examination is limited by some factors within the known or question writing. Moving a little further out, we have probable. It's probable the person either did or did not write the document. And again, it's due to limitations within the known or question writings. Then moving just under identification or elimination, we have strong probability, which means almost certain that the person either did or did not write the document.
And Mr. Jamieson, clarify one more time where probable falls on that scale that you determined.
Probable falls 2 steps below identification, so there's identification, strong probability, and then probable. And then we go further down to indications to I don't know.
And Mr. Jamieson, is it, in your expert opinion, that whoever wrote items 8 and 21, those documents you used to compare in your analysis, probably, meaning a high degree of likelihood, is the writer of the list on that envelope?
Yes.
By the court's indulgence. Nothing further from the state, Your Honor.
Cross-examination.
May I please court, Your Honor?
Good afternoon.
All right, so the testing that you do, that has nothing to do with when something was written, correct? You can't time it. You can't say it's
I
something.
can't time it. Handwriting does change over a period of time, but I cannot date the
Right.
date of execution of the document.
Okay. And the testing, the comparisons that you do have nothing to do with finding DNA on the item.
No,
You don't do anything with fingerprints.
no, other than preserve the document for future latent print and DNA analysis.
Yes, sir. And you do everything that you're supposed to do to preserve that for the next department that's going to get it, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Because you don't want to contaminate anything or change anything for whoever's going to be processing it next.
That's correct.
And you did all those things.
Yes.
You issued your report on April 8th of 2019, correct?
Your Honor, may I refer to my notes, please? Thank you. Yes, the report's dated April 8th.
And can you tell us, if you said it before, I apologize, I missed it, when were all of the items submitted to you?
I'm not sure of the submission date. I know that I started the case on April 4th.
Okay. And so you did your comparison, and then you said you sent it through peer review, and after the peer review part, you issued your report.
That's correct.
And after you issued your report, where does it go? Do you give it directly to the investigator, or where do you send it?
I believe it went over to latent prints, and they were going to process it for latent prints and DNA at the same time. So it's an internal transfer within the laboratory.
I apologize, my question wasn't clear. Where does your report go?
My report goes up to a system called iLab, where the investigators have access to my report. We
Okay.
don't send out a mailed copy.
So any investigator or the lead investigator on a case can access it at any time?
I'm not super familiar with iLab, but I assume so, yes.
Okay. The point is, they don't have to contact you to say, please give me a report. As the investigator, they can go get it.
That's right,
Okay.
yes.
And when you issued your report, you said that your result was that it's probable that
Correct.
the same author was for all three documents, right?
Yeah, well, probable that the writer of the documents that were submitted as known documents is the same writer who wrote the question.
Yes, sir. And you just testified that probable is 2 steps below identification.
That's correct.
But isn't it also 1 step above indication?
Yes,
And then that would be, the second step would be non-conclusion.
that's correct.
Okay. So you were not able to make a higher degree of, I've lost my words. You were not able to make form an opinion on a stronger match between the handwriting samples.
I couldn't come up with a more definitive conclusion.
Yes, sir. But you did put in your report that you were requesting some more information, is that right?
Yes, I was requesting more known documents.
Okay, and that was in the report from April 8th?
Yes,
And the information, you can't go out and try to get information.
no,
That information has to come from the investigator.
yes,
And as far as you know, based on your experience in the field, the information you were trying to gather would come from the solicitor's office, correct?
No, it would actually come from the investigators, the submitters.
Okay, but you asked for that when you issued your report.
In my report, yes.
And the best of your knowledge, nobody did anything else after you issued your report on April 8th.
I did not receive anything else, no.
Okay, you never heard back from the investigator on the case?
No,
Nobody ever gave you anything else to compare?
no,
You issued your report, and then your involvement in this was finished.
yes.
Begging the court's indulgence.
Any redirect?
Just very briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Jamieson, you're not able to put names with samples, right?
No, I have samples that are submitted to me as having been written by somebody, but I have no personal knowledge as to who the writer actually is.
Is it fair to say that you can only compare the samples that you're given?
Yes,
Is that what you did in this case?
yes.
And once again, what was the conclusion that you came to?
It's probable, meaning a high degree of likelihood, that the person who wrote the known documents also prepared the question document.
Thank you, Mr. Jamieson. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Anything further?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you, sir. You call your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court. State calls Michael Moskal.
Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth to help you God?
I do.
Thank you. Please have a seat in the witness stand and state your full name for the record, and please spell your last name.
Michael Moskal, Moskal.
Good afternoon, Mr. Moskal.
Good afternoon.
Where are you employed?
I am currently employed by South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, what's commonly known as SLED, and I am assigned to the Trace Evidence Department in the Forensics Division.
And how long have you been doing that?
I've been in the Trace Evidence Department for about 15 years now.
And what did you do prior to working at SLED?
Prior to working at SLED, I taught high school chemistry at Somerville High School.
And you mentioned trace evidence a minute ago. Could you clarify for the jury what that means?
Yes, ma'am. Trace evidence are pieces of evidence that are often difficult to see with the naked eye. And so most often they're going to require sensitive instrumentation and microscopes in order to be able to view them. They're going to include things like gunshot residue, paint from hit and runs, glass from breaking and enterings, fibers, explosives, and then there's a broad category of just general unknowns where we're looking to identify different chemicals that may come into play somewhere.
And how long have you worked in the field?
15 years at SLED.
And generally, what are some of your day-to-day responsibilities?
So the day-to-day responsibilities are going to be receiving evidence and analyzing it with the intention of being able to make an opinion about what the evidence may hold, issuing a report on it, and then ultimately coming to court to testify.
And is there any sort of specialized training associated with your position?
Yes, ma'am. So in the Trace Evidence Department, each one of those categories I mentioned, gunshot residue, paint, fiber, glass, explosives, each one of those has their own individual training program that lasts anywhere from about 6 months to a year, where the analyst works with a court-qualified analyst in that discipline. I worked cases side by side with them, helped them write reports and come to conclusions. At the end of the training period, after I have worked cases with them, we've had lectures, we've had lots of books to read. At the end of that training period, I was given a case, a mock case, where I had to receive the evidence, analyze it, come up with a conclusion on my own, write a report, and then that was verified by other analysts in the department.
And without naming each one individually, approximately how many trainings have you attended?
I believe my training list is about 40 to 45 different classes that I've been to.
And have you testified as an expert before?
Yes, ma'am, I have. I've testified, I think this will be the 35th testimony.
Your Honor, at this time, the state requests Mr. Michael Moskal be qualified as an expert in the area of trace evidence. Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Moskal, I want to draw your attention to March and April of 2019. Were you contacted regarding an investigation into the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Josephson.
Yes, ma'am, I was.
Do you recall when you became involved with that investigation?
According to my notes, I started doing some bleach research around 4/22 of 2019.
And specifically, what was your involvement in that investigation?
I was informed that I would have a variety of evidence where there was a interest to determine whether or not bleach was present on these items.
All right, Mr. Moskal, I want to talk about oxidizers.
Yes, ma'am.
In the simplest definition that you can possibly think of, can you please describe what an oxidizer is?
Yes, ma'am. So an oxidizer is one part of a chemical reaction known as a redox reaction. It has one part that is a reducer, one part that's an oxidizer. And basically it involves the transfer of electrons from one of those particles to the other.
Would a fair characterization of that be something that causes a chemical reaction to form another chemical compound of some sort?
Yes, ma'am. During this process, new chemicals are will be formed. These reactions include things that may be very slow to occur, like rusting. They may be very rapid to occur, like fires, or the discoloration that you see on clothing when something like bleach is poured onto them.
And what is an example of a strong oxidizer?
An example of a strong oxidizer would be a chlorinated bleach solution.
And how do you test for the presence of those strong oxidizers?
There are a couple pieces that we will test to determine whether a chlorinated oxidizer is present or not. The first one is a chemical test. It's a spot test, much like somebody who is running an aquarium would use to test the pH in the aquarium. You take a solution, you add a drop of a chemical to it, and if it turns one color, you know it's acidic. If it turns another color, you know it's basic. So in the lab, we use a chemical known as diphenylamine. If we have a solution that we believe may be a strong oxidizer, we'll put it into a spot plate and then add a drop of diphenylamine to it. And if it turns a bright blue instantly, we know that there was a strong oxidizer present.
Would it be fair to compare this process similar to testing for, say, the level of chlorine in your pool?
It's a similar process. The chemistry is a different reaction, but it's the same type of process. You take a solution out of the pool, add a chemical to it. If it turns one color, you know it's a certain pH. If it turns a different color, you know it's different. And then based on the color you get, you add chemicals to adjust the pH. So it's the same type of process.
And when you're conducting the spot test, if that solution turns bright blue, what did you mention that's an indication of?
So when we add diphenylamine to a solution, if it turns a dark blue instantly, that indicates that there is a strong oxidizer present.
And are your test results peer-reviewed?
Yes, ma'am, they are. Every report that we issue in the trace department is reviewed by another qualified analyst. That includes all of our documentation from the time we receive the evidence till the time we write the report.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with what's been entered as State's Exhibit 25. Mr. Moskal, do you recognize what I just handed you?
Yes, ma'am, I do. State's Exhibit 5 has a barcode with the number L1906797 item number 35.3, which is the lab number for this case and the item number for this bottle of top bleach. It also has my initial and dates from various days where I performed analysis on this item.
I believe you just said it, but did you perform a chemical analysis of the liquid inside this bottle?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what did your test results show? I believe it's item 35 in your report.
Yes, ma'am. So my results for this item of top job bleach indicate that say that a strong chlorinated oxidizer was found. And an example of a strong oxidizer containing chlorine is chlorinated bleach.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with what's been previously entered into evidence as states Exhibit 23. Do you recognize that?
Yes, ma'am, I do. There is a handwritten lab number associated with this, and the seal on the bag is my initials with the date where I sealed this evidence at completion.
And did you perform a chemical analysis on the contents of that item?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And what did your test results show?
So on the germicidal whites, again, I found a strong oxidizer containing chlorine. And so an example of a strong oxidizer containing chlorine would be chlorine bleach.
Mr. Moskal, Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with what's been previously entered as states Exhibit 17. Mr. Moskal, do you recognize what I just handed you?
Yes, ma'am, I do. Again, states Exhibit 17 has a barcode and lab number and item number associated with this case, and it has a seal with my initials and date from where I completed this analysis.
And what did the results of your analysis show?
So my analysis on, this is a bottle of LA's Totally Awesome Cleaner. My results indicate that a light oxygenated solvent and a strong oxidizer containing chlorine was found.
And one more time, what is an example of a strong oxidizing agent containing sodium, chlorine, and oxygen?
A strong oxidizing agent containing sodium, chlorine, and oxygen. An example of that is chlorinated bleach.
And for this item in particular, did you run a standard?
Yes, ma'am. We purchased a bottle of Totally Awesome Cleaner from the store. I analyzed it.
And what did that analysis, I apologize. When you ran the standard of what's normally contained in this brand of liquid, was there any evidence of a strong oxidizing agent containing sodium, chlorine, and oxygen, also known as bleach?
No, ma'am. In the standard that we purchased, that was analyzed and it did not contain a strong oxidizer.
Your Honor, I'm approaching the witness with what's been marked for identification purposes as State's Exhibit 194 and State's Exhibit 219. Do you recognize the contents of those packages?
State's Exhibit 194 and Exhibit 219, again, both have the barcode with the lab number associated with this case. They contain my initials and dates on various parts of the containers. Yes, ma'am, I do recognize them.
And what are those items inside of the containers, if you will?
So State's Exhibit 217 has two parts in here. One is a test tube containing a solution. That would have been a solution where I added, can I refer to my notes for 1 second?
Your Honor, may the witness refer to his notes?
Thank you. So when I receive an item where I'm looking to see whether bleach was present or not, the first thing I'm going to look for is an area of discoloration. If I find an area of discoloration, I will cut a portion of that out, place it in a test tube, and add some water to it so that if anything is precipitated or there are any solids on that article, they come out into a solution. And so the test tube here is a portion of that solution that I removed from my item 107, State's Exhibit 219. The next part of the test.
Oh, Mr. Moskal, I'll stop you right there. Just briefly, did you make these cuttings yourself?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
Okay. And that would that include both items? In your report, I believe it's 107.2 and 52.1.
Yes, ma'am.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would ask that these items be entered into evidence. It's State's Exhibit 219 and State's Exhibit 194.
Your Honor, this goes to our previous objections.
They're admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. And do you recall, I want to draw your attention back to item 107.2 of your report. What item of evidence did you take that cutting from?
All right, the cutting 107.2 in my lab report came from item 107, which was a black left-hand glove.
And as for item 52.1, I believe you mentioned you made the cutting, but what item of evidence did that come from?
Item 52.1 was a cutting that I took from a pair of gray Puma sweatpants.
And prior to taking those cuttings for further testing, did you notate an area of discoloration on the clothing items?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And would those areas of discoloration be consistent with bleaching?
They were consistent with what I've seen on clothes that I've bleached before. Yes, ma'am.
And did you perform tests on these cuttings for the presence of a strong oxidizer such as bleach?
Yes, ma'am.
And did those tests reveal the presence of a strong oxidizer?
Neither one of them revealed the presence of a strong oxidizer, but both of them, when I did the elemental analysis, contained the elements sodium, chlorine, and oxygen.
Is it fair to say that the results are inconclusive for the presence of a chlorine-based bleach?
Yes, ma'am.
And, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
when we analyze these items looking for a chlorinated oxidizer, it's a two-part test. We're looking to see that the oxidizer is present and that the elements sodium, chlorine, and oxygen are present. If one or the other portions of that test turns out negative, then the report is going to be inconclusive.
And how can that be?
Bleach, the main ingredient in bleach, or the active ingredient in it, is a chemical called sodium hypochlorite, and it decomposes very easily when it's exposed to air with increases in temperature, contact with metals. Those things are going to cause sodium hypochlorite to decompose fairly rapidly.
And what happens if those contents aren't captured and sealed relatively quickly
Yes,
in an
ma'am.
airtight container?
So
say?
again, in order to be able to capture the compound itself, it needs to be sealed and collected relatively quickly. Otherwise, it degrades and we will not be able to identify them.
And Mr. Moskal, in your opinion and based on your experience, in your expert opinion, what does bleach smell like when it's exposed to air?
Probably the most common thing to compare it to would be a chlorinated pool cleaner.
I have a court's indulgence. No further questions from the state, Your Honor.
Questions by the defense?
If you please, court, Your Honor.
Yes.
Hello.
Can you tell us with the three elements that are required, the sodium, you said sodium, chlorine, and oxygen.
Yes, ma'am.
What are some examples, other just natural examples, that could leave sodium on something?
So some other common examples that are going to contain both sodium and chlorine are going to be sweat, salt from potato chips or French fries. Those are probably two of the most common things.
Okay. What about chlorine? Is there,
Chlorine, the pool cleaners are probably going to be about the most common thing that I can give you.
and oxygen? Is there,
Oxygen is all around us, and it's in just about everything we're going to come across.
okay, so there's
A
other
bunch. ways
ways that these three elements could show up individually or combined with other elements.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the items you just testified about, the gray Puma pants. It's item 52.1. You said with the two-part test that you do, it failed the second part.
It did not show the presence of an oxidizer, yes, ma'am.
Okay. When you received these pants, you did your own cutting?
Yes, ma'am, I did.
And you cut where you noticed a discoloration.
Yes, ma'am.
Was that discoloration, what were was it wet?
They were dry when I received them.
Okay. And the same thing with the glove, was the glove wet or dry?
It was dry when I received it.
Okay. So when you're dealing with discolorations, you said it yourself, you bleached a shirt before.
Yes, ma'am.
So just because a shirt or a pair of pants is discolored doesn't mean it happened right then. It could have happened at another time.
Yes, ma'am. There is no timestamp on the discoloration.
Okay. You just know that you see it, so you cut it.
Yes, ma'am.
Is there a way that you can do trace analysis on skin? Like if I spilled something on my hand, could you take a sample or do some testing?
For some things, yes, ma'am.
Would you be able to do that for bleach?
I have never tested bleach on somebody's hands before.
Okay. Would you be able to do it for gasoline?
We can do it for gasoline, yes, ma'am.
Okay. But nobody gave you anything like that to test?
No, ma'am.
Okay. It's just the items that you have in your report?
Just the items in my report, yes, ma'am.
Yes, sir. And it's not up to you to go out and get something? You're only able to test what you're given?
Correct.
Begging the court's indulgence. Thank you, Mr. Moskal. Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Anything further?
Very briefly, Your Honor. Mr. Moskal, defense just asked you about other potential sources, if you will, of portions of elements that could be combined to form bleach, which is what we were talking about here.
Yes, ma'am.
And I think she mentioned French fries, sweat, and grease.
Yes, ma'am.
Do those things typically give off the odor of pool cleaner?
Not in my experience.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Moskal. No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. Let me step down.
Thank you.
We'll take a break now, ladies and gentlemen, of about 10 minutes. Please do not discuss the case. 10-minute break.